Hello, people of God. Today is Transfiguration Sunday, and we're also still singing the Psalms. I invite you to read Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 9, and then Psalm 50, verses 1 to 6. These are the texts that are guiding our thoughts today. So let's start with names. Names are important. I have 3 of them, a first, middle, and a last. How many do you have? Names are how we are identified. Wherever we go, people want to know our name. And if we have to sign legal documents, we sign all of our names. Sometimes we're asked what other names we've ever used because people want to know who we are. They want to know without a doubt. And without a doubt, I know I'm in trouble if my mother uses all 3 of my names. And yeah, she still does. Names tell us who people are on so many levels. It also tells us the relationship people have with one another. My first grade teacher was Mrs. Murray. I still call her Mrs. Murray today, even though I know her first name was Jane. I just don't have permission to use it. And then there's my husband. I have never called him Mr. Johnson a day in my life. Names tell us the relationship people have with one another. They tell us how close we are, how much respect and authority people have. And Psalm 50 starts us out telling us about the authority of God, partly because of the name. The very first words of Psalm 50, verse 1, tell us the mighty one, God the Lord. In Hebrew, that is 3 different names for God. The Mighty One was the ancient Canaanite name for supreme deity. In Hebrew, the Mighty One is El. Any supreme deity from the ancient Near Eastern religions would be called El. And then God in Hebrew is Elohim. Elohim is the name given to the God of Israel. So this is a little more personal than just El. It's important to notice that Elohim could reference the God of the Israelites, but it's also a general name that could be for any God in the Israelite region. There's room for ambiguity about which God is being named. But the Lord, that is a very specific name, and it was originally spelled YHWH. It's Israel's personal name for God. The people weren't permitted to say the name that was spelled YHWH, so instead they used the Lord, which in Hebrew is Adonai. These names of God are interesting for us because these 3 names lead us from a general deity to the very specific God that we worship today. When we know that this God, this El Elohim Adonai, the mighty one, God the Lord, is speaking, this God is speaking with all authority that could ever exist. These names are a flag to us that this is something important. And just in case the names didn't clue us in, the songwriter spends the first 5 verses showing us the power of God's ability to speak. See, God speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. God does not keep silent. And when God speaks, everything is on fire and all shook up. And God calls to the heavens and to the earth when the people of God are summoned. God is righteous, and God has all the authority. And don't forget, people of God, God is our judge. Because God is paying attention to us and to how we treat people. So Psalm 50, this is one of those special psalms because it's not just a song. And it's not a praise song, it's not a prayer song. It is a sermon in 23 verses. This sermon addresses 2 problems for their congregation. There's a misunderstanding about sacrifice, and there's a failure to live lives consistent with the beliefs that they possess as the people of God. So God the judge, the one with all the authority, was paying attention to what the people were doing. And here was a message from the Lord for how they needed to take care of the problems. They weren't bringing a sacrifice to God out of gratitude. They were doing it to show off, and that people weren't living faithfully to the covenant that they had made with God. So God speaks up and calls them to account. Because God can, because God has authority, and because God has a voice. When God speaks in the stories that we read, God always speaks with authority. These are the words from the divine creator. And when people are spoken to, when God speaks to all of creation. And the Psalms are full of the imagery, showing us that heaven and earth respond when God speaks. The entire Bible is full of stories showing us that people don't respond or even listen when God speaks. And that's where the tension is. And that's why Psalm 50 is a sermon that invites remembrance of the covenant that God makes with people. El Elohim Adonai has something to say to us. God speaks more than 2,000 times in the Old Testament. And God speaks to Moses and to Jonah and to the prophets. And God speaks out of a burning bush and out of a cloud. God speaks from the mountaintops. And God speaks in so many ways. The words of God are given to the people. But in the New Testament, God speaks directly to a group of people and issues a simple command at the Transfiguration of Jesus Christ. James and John are up the mountain with Peter and Jesus, because Jesus has told them he's got something to show them. He transfigures before them. He changes his appearance from fully human to something dazzling and bright. He is simply radiant, and Moses and Elijah appear with him. As Jesus stands on this mountaintop, he is in the presence of the prophets, those of the past, Moses and Elijah, and he's in the presence of the disciples of the future, Peter, James, and John. He is connecting with what was and what will be. Jesus is the connecting tissue between old ways and new ways, between the prophecy and the reality, the promise, between humanity and divinity, where the temporal meets the eternal. Right there in the middle is Jesus Christ. Things are starting to get real, and the transfiguration of Jesus shows us that Jesus is this bridge. Jesus is the way. But just in case we don't get it, Peter, James, and John don't get it either. So God speaks. God speaks something important and what we should do about it. There's just that. That's all we need, is to hear what God has to say, what God says is important, and what the people of God should do about that important thing. So when God speaks, God says, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." God is naming Jesus in a different way. Jesus is now named the Son of God, and Jesus is named Beloved. These names say who Jesus really is, not some prophet of old to be confused with Elijah or John the Baptist. This is the Son of God, the Beloved. If you want to get someone's attention, call them by name. If you want people to know who you're talking about, use a name. And God seriously got everyone's attention on that mountaintop. Then God issued a commandment. This divine commandment. Can you imagine what that was like? To hear a commandment coming straight from the voice of God? Listen to him. Listen to him. As soon as God said, listen to him, the prophets disappeared. The prophets whom the people had previously listened to. This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him. Only Jesus was left. Don't listen to Moses and Elijah. They're gone. Listen to Jesus. Only Jesus. Listen to him. It's so easy for us to read these words and go, yeah, right, we know that Jesus is the Son of God. Sure, we got it. It's easy for us to accept the Transfiguration. It's an event we don't understand, but sure, we've heard about it. Yeah, it's okay. God grants Jesus all the authority of being God in this story. It's a transference of the power of the name of God. All of that authority that we read about, all that authority described to us in those first 6 verses of Psalm 50, that's now given to Jesus Christ in this public manner on the mountaintop. The disciples hear without a doubt, Jesus has all the authority of God. Jesus has got it all. El Elohim Adonai has the authority to speak. And when El Elohim Adonai speaks, the earth and heavens respond. And now El Elohim Adonai has spoken that Jesus is God. Listen to him. This is a pivotal moment in the life and the ministry of Jesus Christ. He knew the people were wondering about his identity. He had even asked the disciples what the word on the street was back in chapter 8. And it was time for there to be no doubt, especially among his followers. Scripture tells us at the baptism of Jesus, a voice called out from the heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." That was in Mark 1:11. But only Jesus could hear that proclamation. Jesus knew who he was. But now at the Transfiguration, everyone could hear, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." No more doubts. No more wondering. Absolute certainty. This is really God with us. Emmanuel, beloved Jesus. There is power in a name. There is authority in a name. There is identity in a name. And the songwriter shows us the names speak of intimacy and relationship. And the songwriter shows us that when God speaks, amazing things happen. When God speaks, everything changes. In Genesis, God spoke creation into being, and it was good. Today, we hear God speaking the identity of Jesus Christ, and it is very good. Today, we hear God announcing that Jesus has divine authority, and it is very, very good. Today, we hear God speaking to each one of us, speaking to us that vital divine commandment. Listen to him. What is Jesus speaking to us? Make space to listen. God speaks. We listen. Jesus speaks. We listen. Thanks be to God.